The flight attendant froze in the aisle. An elderly man in seat 12A was talking softly, his voice trembling with emotion, but the two seats beside him were completely empty. Passengers nearby glanced at each other with uncomfortable looks. Some whispered, some pulled out their phones. The man's hands were shaking as he spoke to the air, and tears were streaming down his wrinkled face. "I'm sorry I left you behind," he whispered to no one. "I should have stayed. I should have been braver." The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, felt her heart tighten in her chest. She had seen confused passengers before, people who needed help, but something about this man's voice made her stop. It wasn't confusion. It was grief. It was guilt. It was a pain so deep that it had lived inside him for decades. She didn't walk past him. She didn't call for backup. Instead, she did something that no one expected. She sat down in the empty seat beside him. The man didn't even notice her at first. His eyes were locked on the window, but Sarah could tell he wasn't looking at the clouds or the sky. He was looking at something far away, something only he could see. His hands gripped the armrest so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Sarah leaned in gently and said, "Sir, are you okay? Can I get you some water?" The man blinked slowly, like he was waking up from a dream. He turned to look at her, and for a moment his face was full of surprise. Then his lips trembled, and he shook his head. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was talking to my friends. They were here with me once. A long time ago." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. She didn't fully understand yet, but she could feel the weight of his words. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're not causing any trouble. Would you like to tell me about them?" The old man's name was Harold. He was 87 years old, and he was flying alone from Los Angeles to North Carolina to visit his daughter. But this wasn't just any flight for him. This was the same route he had taken 70 years ago when he came home from the war. Harold had been a soldier in the Korean War. He was only 19 when he was sent overseas, scared and far from home. He told Sarah that he had two best friends during the war. Their names were Tommy and Martin. The three of them had been inseparable. They shared rations, told jokes to keep each other sane, and made promises that they would all make it home together. They dreamed about what they would do when the war was over. Tommy wanted to open a bakery. Martin wanted to become a teacher. Harold wanted to marry his high school sweetheart and build a life full of peace. But war doesn't care about dreams. One cold morning in November, their unit was ambushed. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Harold remembered the chaos, the screaming, the smell of smoke and blood. In the middle of it all, Tommy was hit. He fell to the ground, clutching his side, gasping for air. Martin ran to him without thinking, trying to pull him to safety. Harold was frozen. He stood there for just a few seconds, paralyzed by fear, and in those few seconds, everything changed. An explosion ripped through the field. When the dust cleared, Tommy and Martin were gone. Harold survived. He was pulled out by another soldier and sent to a medical tent. He came home 3 months later, but he never felt like he truly made it back. He carried the guilt with him every single day. He believed he was a coward. He believed he should have done more. He believed his friends died because he hesitated. Sarah sat beside him, her eyes filling with tears as she listened. Other passengers had stopped staring now. Some were wiping their own eyes. The cabin had gone quiet except for Harold's soft, broken voice. "I talk to them sometimes," Harold said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know it sounds crazy, but when I'm alone, I tell them I'm sorry. I tell them about my life, about my kids, about everything I got to do that they didn't. And I ask them to forgive me." Sarah reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "Harold," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion, "you didn't abandon them. You were 19 years old in the middle of a war. You were terrified. That doesn't make you a coward. That makes you human." Harold shook his head, tears spilling faster now. "But I lived," he said. "I got to grow old. I got to have a family. They didn't. Why did I get to live when they didn't?" Sarah took a deep breath. She thought about her own grandfather, who had also been a veteran. He had passed away 2 years ago, and she had never taken the time to really listen to his stories. She had always been too busy, too distracted. She regretted that now more than anything. "Harold," she said. Maybe you lived because you were supposed to. Maybe you were supposed to come home and build that life. Maybe you were supposed to have children and grandchildren who carry your strength forward. And maybe Tommy and Martin would be so proud of you for that. Harold looked at her, his eyes searching her face like he was looking for permission to believe her. Do you really think so? He asked. Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand. I know so, and I think they're not angry with you. I think they're grateful you made it. I think they're with you right now, and they're glad you're still here. If the story is touching your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still exists. And if you believe in the power of stories that heal, that inspire, that remind us we're all human, then you're in the right place. This is Humanity Tales Studio, where every story is a reminder that love, compassion, and second chances are real. Stay with us. This story isn't over yet. Harold sat in silence for a long moment, staring down at their hands. Then, slowly, he began to speak again. This time, his voice was softer, calmer. He told Sarah about his life after the war. He told her that he did marry his high school sweetheart, a woman named Clara. They had 3 children together. He worked as a carpenter for 40 years, building homes for families, creating spaces where people could feel safe. He said that every time he built something, he thought about Tommy and Martin. He built for them. He lived for them. He raised his kids to be kind, to be brave, to stand up for others. He volunteered at veteran centers. He visited schools and talked to young people about the cost of war and the importance of peace. He had spent 70 years trying to honor the friends he lost. But no matter how much good he did, the guilt never fully went away. Sarah listened to every word. She realized that Harold wasn't just grieving his friends. He was grieving the boy he used to be, the innocence he lost, the version of himself that died on that battlefield even though his body survived. Harold, she said quietly, you've been carrying them with you all this time. You've been living a life that honors them. But I think it's time you forgive yourself. I think it's time you let yourself feel peace. Harold's face crumpled, and he let out a sob that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. Sarah didn't pull away. She stayed right there beside him, holding his hand, letting him cry. Other passengers around them were crying too. A woman across the aisle wiped her eyes with a tissue. A teenage boy sitting 2 rows back had his head down, his shoulders shaking. Even the man in the business suit who had been typing on his laptop the entire flight had stopped and was staring at them with glistening eyes. After a few minutes, Harold took a shaky breath and looked up at Sarah. Thank you, he said. I've never told anyone the whole story before. Not even my wife. Not even my kids. I didn't think anyone would understand. Sarah smiled through her own tears. I understand, she said. And I'm honored that you told me. Your story matters, Harold. Your pain matters. And so does your healing. Harold nodded slowly, and for the first time in 70 years, he felt a small flicker of something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. The plane landed in North Carolina an hour later. As passengers began to gather their bags and file off the plane, Harold stood up slowly, his legs stiff from the flight. Sarah stood with him, helping him reach for his bag in the overhead compartment. As he turned to leave, he paused and looked back at her. You remind me of my daughter, he said softly. She has a good heart like you. I'm lucky to be seeing her today. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. She's lucky to have you, Harold. Don't ever forget that. Harold smiled, a real smile this time, and he reached out to hug her. Sarah hugged him back tightly, and in that moment, something beautiful happened. The other passengers, the ones who had been watching, the ones who had been moved by Harold's story, began to clap. Started with 1 person, then 2, then the entire cabin erupted in applause. They weren't clapping because the flight was over. They were clapping for Harold. They were clapping for his courage, for his pain, for his survival, for his life. Harold looked around in shock, his eyes wide and wet. He raised one shaky hand in a small wave, and people smiled at him, nodding with respect and love. As he walked down the aisle toward the exit, passengers reached out to shake his hand, to pat his shoulder, to say, "Thank you for your service, and God bless you." Harold had boarded that plane feeling invisible, feeling like a ghost haunted by the past. But he stepped off that plane feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling human again. Sarah stood at the door of the plane watching him go. Her supervisor walked up beside her and said, "What happened back there? I've never seen anything like that." Sarah wiped her eyes and smiled. "He just needed someone to listen," she said. Her supervisor nodded thoughtfully. "You did a good thing today," she said. "That's what this job is really about. It's not just about serving drinks and checking seatbelts. It's about seeing people, really seeing them." Sarah nodded, her heart full. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a letter in the mail. It was from Harold. Inside was a handwritten note on faded paper, his handwriting shaky but clear. It read, "Dear Sarah, I wanted to thank you again for sitting with me on that flight. I didn't know how much I needed to tell that story until I did. When I got to my daughter's house, I told her everything. I told her about Tommy and Martin. I told her about the guilt I've carried all these years. And for the first time, I cried in front of her. She held me just like you did. She told me she was proud of me. That night, I slept better than I have in 70 years. I dreamed about my friends, but this time they were smiling. They weren't angry. They weren't hurt. They were at peace. And I think maybe I am too. You gave me that gift, Sarah. You gave me permission to forgive myself. I will never forget you. With all my gratitude, Harold." Tucked inside the envelope was a small black and white photograph. It showed 3 young soldiers standing together, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. On the back, in faded ink, it said, "Tommy, Martin, and me, Korea, 1952, brothers forever." Sarah held the photo in her hands and cried. She cried for Harold. She cried for Tommy and Martin. She cried for every person who carries invisible wounds, every person who feels unseen, every person who just needs someone to sit beside them and listen. She put the photo on her refrigerator, and every time she saw it, she was reminded of why kindness matters, why empathy matters, why taking the time to see someone, really see them, can change their entire life. This is the world we live in, a world where people are hurting in silence, a world where loneliness and guilt and grief live quietly inside so many hearts. But this is also a world where one moment of kindness can break through all of that. One moment of listening, one moment of compassion, one moment of saying, "I see you, your pain is real, and you are not alone." That's what Humanity Tales Studio is all about. We share these stories because we believe they matter. We believe that every act of kindness, no matter how small, creates a ripple that spreads farther than we can imagine. If Harold's story moved you, if it reminded you to slow down and see the people around you, then share it. Tell someone. Be the person who listens. Be the person who sits down when everyone else walks by. Because that's how we change the world. One story, one moment, one heart at a time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the goodness that still exists. And remember, you never know who needs you to just sit beside them and listen.